بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيد الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Imam Marc here with a return to the podcast. I know it's been quite a while, and inshallah I hope to get back to doing some episodes with Brother Dawood here, inshallah, hopefully soon. But for today's episode, I want to share a conversation that I had with a friend before class, in which he asked me what were my thoughts about Muslims facing challenges. In this case, it's a Muslim community in Texas that is seeking to build a community, specifically a Muslim community, in which there will be not only a masjid, but housing and shops, and really thinking like an intentional community. But of course, there's been some backlash. This is Texas after all. There has been some backlash, specifically with the community being charged with the age-old caricature of establishing Sharī'ah law. And I wanted to take a moment and, share this little soundbite of how I tried to answer the question. Specifically, how do we deal with this caricature of Sharī'ah, and how can we help define it? First priority for us as Muslims, because there's a temptation to want to explain Islam for the non-Muslims, which of course is important to do, but I think we should get our own house in order first. So I wanted to share my thoughts on how to answer that question, unpacking what is Sharī'ah and how Sharī'ah is far more fluid and inclusive in the way that it's not just simply a law, but it also shapes the personal lives of Muslims. So in this conversation, you're going to kind of hear sort of a candid back and forth between myself and the brother. And I'm hoping that whether you are a Muslim, Christian, or otherwise, that inshallah you'll find the conversation insightful, stirring. Maybe you'll have some comments or critiques, and inshallah beneficial. And I'm inclined to think he is choosing.
Yeah. So one thing that they were having like the local county meeting or whatever on whether the people were going to try to support it or not. And so many people were there saying the same types of things in a less articulate manner, talking about how they do not want Sharia law in their backyard and this, that, and the other thing. One thing that I found interesting is there was a woman that was from the Epic community addressing those concerns. And she said something that stood out to me, which is, we don't impose Sharia on our own people. We're not going to do it on you guys. Which the problem that I found with that was, I don't think, like, in a context of living in a non-Muslim country, I'm not sure that that's an accurate, like the whole characterization of the conversation is being mischaracterized. And what do you think can and should be done about that, if anything?
One, I think there is a presumption that Sharia and law are one and the same. Because law, as it's understood, ironically, by even secularized Christians in the West, is very different than how it will be understood by Muslims. So as Muslims, we believe that Sharia is, you could say it is like qanun, like it's laws and it's ahkam and this kind of thing. But the idea is that it sort of directly rolls downhill from divine authority, right? So there's Allah, there's the Quran, there's the Prophet ﷺ, and then from that we extrapolate this kind of large canopy, this big umbrella that we call the Sharia. Whereas for most Christians, they have no notion of any kind of divine law. It's receded very far into the background. It is still, to some degree, I think, plays a role on influencing the development of their law, but that mechanism, I think, is very much receded to the background, and it's something that is more like now kind of like in history. And so I think most Christians they're not a people. They might be people of law, like, you shouldn't speed, or there's regulations for this or that. But by and large, personal law and family law, as it relates to Christians in the modern context, is almost doesn't exist. Like, there's nothing you have to do as a Christian in your daily life from a legal point of view, in the way that we would look at. So one, it's this kind of apples and oranges. We're assuming that law, Sharia is Islamic law. This is a completely clumsy assumption that we're talking essentially about the same thing. As to the sister's point about we don't impose it upon our own people, I mean, yes and no. How do you define that? Like, impose or, yeah, true. Nobody's going around saying, okay, man, it's Dhuhr, you got to pray now. And if you're not praying, I'm going to write you a ticket or put you in jail or, whatever. But we very much do establish places of prayer, and we very much encourage other people to pray. And I would even go to the extent that, like, if a person doesn't pray, that person will face some type of, but at least potentially so, a criticism, and they're looked upon as, like not practicing. So anyway, I just feel like the person that is saying this, like, oh, well, don't worry, we don't even impose it upon our own people. Where do you get any idea that Sharia is something to be imposed on non-Muslims? Like, if you look at the dearth of what is Sharia, well, a huge chunk of Sharia is going to just be like personal law, right? Personal rules and regulations, like you have to clean your butt when you go to the bathroom. This is Sharia. I'm just saying, like, this is Sharia. I mean, of which, you might actually thank us later if we did impose that on some of you, but that's fine. Like, the idea of law is a very different, I would say, especially in Islam, it's not only much more fluid than it is in a post-Christendom, secular Christian sort of point of view, but it's also far less contended. So the way that Europe evolved and then eventually giving birth to America and this thing that everybody loves to call democracy, which nobody really knows what the heck that is that you have really a monopoly on the writing of the law, or the conceptualization of law, the interpretation of law, and the execution of the law. That's really like a monopoly. So while you might have these split up into the executive branch and the judicial branch, you might have these split off into different areas, but there isn't like Congress is tasked with what? Like, what is the job of Congress versus the Senate? Like, one of them is about like writing the laws, and the other is about essentially, interpreting the law, I suppose you could say. Or really, that's more like the judicial, but they're really more about the execution of laws and that kind of thing, right? So, but there's not more than one Congress, right? Like, sure, you have your political striations of Democrat and Independent and Republic, but these are not, once you ascend, like you can be in your political party, but once you ascend to the position of a congressman or a congresswoman or whatever, you are no longer writing democratic laws. You might be writing democratically influenced laws, but like you're not writing those body of laws now, like kind of like officially within the Democratic Party. Or in Islam, like we have had essentially for the vast majority of our history, we've had the different madhahib, or we've had the different legal schools. And at different points in time, under different rulership, there were periods where actually you had more than one madhab that was seen as equally autonomous before the people and before the law, meaning that, like, you might have like a Maliki judge and a Shafi'i judge. And so as a person, let's say you're Shafi'i and you want to go to court, but you don't want to deal, or you don't want a Maliki judge to adjudicate your issue. So you go to the Shafi'i court, and to the overall ruler, that is seen as legitimate. Meaning that there, and again, I'm not trying to sell anybody some sort of like utopia, but generally speaking, throughout Muslim history, there has been far less of a monopoly on the law. And that we would probably all tend to agree, even where there were monopolies, because you did have points in history where the Malikis were kicked out of Egypt and instead they became Shafi'i or whatever. That the general disposition of the laity, like the ummah, and of the ulama is like, that's not right. Like, we should have a plurality of writing of the law from these different positions, let alone from its execution. I just don't know if this person that's talking has enough appreciation of all those things to be able to differentiate between, one and the other, because those are important differentiations.
I got the sense that what she was defending against, and this is me imposing my own understanding of what she was saying. I don't know what she meant, but she was trying to convince them that, nobody's hands were going to get chopped off or anything like that. And that's where the question stems.
But see, that also is reductionist. That means all Sharī'ah is chopping hands. Or even when it comes to theft, which the Sharī'ah is obviously concerned with, that the only means of adjudicating an issue of theft is to cut off the hands. But then to that, why do you shy away from a legitimate Shar'i and even Quranic position about cutting off the hands? Because that's what Allah Ta'ala actually mentions in the Quran. Why do you shy away from standing by what the Quran advocates? Right? So this is what I mean. It's like, on one hand, you've reduced the Sharia to the caricature of the Kafir's view of Sharia, which is a problem. But then, on the other hand, you've also essentially almost kowtowed to allow the kafir to have the authoritative voice on positioning what the Sharia is, which within our own tradition, we simultaneously avow the Quran advocates in a general sense of cutting the hand of the thief, and yet there is volumes of books of where judges and scholars, and even amongst the Sahaba, when it came to acts of theft, not every single one resulted in the severing of a hand. So we have the ability to, I don't want to say paradoxically, but simultaneously confirm and avow the authority that that is a legitimate thing that you can do, and therefore it is neither cruel nor inhumane, but rather it is just. At the same time, there is clearly somewhere in that, taken from how the Prophet ﷺ perhaps discussed it, how the Sahaba implemented it in cases of which they did not sever hands, and nobody was questioning them as being not faithful to the so-called Quran and Sunnah. And this is my problem with a person like this, is that you are essentially, out of fear of the gaze of the kafir, and assuaging their fears, of which there is no end to that charlatan game, right? To that shell game, you will never ever move them to a position where, okay, I've kowtowed to all of your demands. Now you will give me the dignity and self-respect that I'm hoping I'll get in return. You will never get that. Versus standing your ground and saying, like, no, the Quran, which is revelation from God, has deemed that obviously in some circumstances, cutting the hand of the thief is the appropriate, just thing to do, because we believe Allah is just, and we believe his book is inimitable and beyond critique. So if Allah advocates for that, that's the end of the story. But at the same time, if the Sahaba, who were this great community of people that actually embodied and put it into practice, and there were circumstances of which they did not implement that, and they were not known to be people of excessive disobedience, neither to Allah Ta'ala or to the Prophet ﷺ, then clearly like we have a much broader picture to paint versus a caricature. And so that disposition really only enhances the kind of caricaturization of Islam in the eyes of those people that you're hoping may at some day have a different view of Islam. And it's also emasculating. And I feel like it's kind of, there's some forms of humor, like self-deprecating humor, that can be funny and can be beneficial as it leads to telling a joke. But I don't believe in being self-deprecating as like as a moral virtue and an ethic and a way of life. I think that's a mistake.
So let's say somebody asks you to come talk to the Christians in North Texas that had a concern about this. How would you articulate what she was articulating, or how would you address the concern of Sharia in their backyard?
I would be like, number one, it's too late. Sharia has already been here. It's been here from the day the first Muslim ever set foot on American soil. Sharia is, I have to make wudu and I have to pray. Sharia is, when I pray, I face the Qibla. Sharia is, I will call upon nobody other than Allah. I will not call upon the son of Mary. I will not call upon Moses. I will not call upon an idol. Sharia is, I want to have religiously slaughtered meat. Sharia is this. Sharia has been going on all of this time because, again, Sharia is expansive, and that there are aspects of the Sharia that pertain to the laity and just the everyday Muslim of how to conduct their daily affairs, from treating their spouses and their children and getting along with people to conducting different types of religious rituals. And then there's the Sharia of the rulers. So now you want to get down to, because cutting the hand, this is something the purview of the ruler. So am I a ruler? I mean, I'm an imam, but I'm not a ruler. I'm not a person that's been, I'm not ruling anything. So when it comes to those aspects of the Sharia, though I would not make the mistake of trying to change them and put them in a certain light to appease you. No. Personally, do I think a penal system that punishes people fairly, that also will encourage others to not commit the same crime and sends a clear message that crime will be punished and on, do I think that's a more equitable and just and precise system than a gigantic Ponzi scheme of developing an economic system that's based off of exploiting people who commit crimes and making ungodly sums of money off of them and locking them up where they will commit homosexual acts upon one another and more violence? Do you really want to have that conversation of which one do I think is a better system? Sure, we can have that. I'll tell you right now. Sharia is definitely a much better system, right? And so clearly in the West, they believe in some, in a broad stroke way, they believe in some form of capital punishment. That's why some people get put to death, right? I mean, that's what happens when some people go. So you have your own view on capital punishment. So do we. For me, it's like, I'm not really concerned about assuaging your fears. If you're a person that is fearful, then that's your problem, because I have done nothing to you to cause you to have fears. If actually quite the opposite, there's probably a higher chance that I have more reason to fear you. But I think this idea of like, if I were to invite it, I would be like, look, just get over yourselves. Let's put the 800-pound gorilla in the room and everybody can stare at it. This is all because you think you are entitled to dictate your reality according to your personal whims. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. You guys throw the Constitution and the baby with the bathwater out the window whenever it's convenient for you, right? So if you're about Constitution, then Sharia is part of my religion. Am I not enshrined, so to speak, in the Constitution to have the freedom to practice my religion? Yeah? Okay, shut up. Go about your business. I don't care whether or not you are terrified of Sharia or not. Right? And I'm not concerned with whether or not you, it's not my job to educate you on that, to get you to arrive at a point of comfort. You make yourself comfortable. Just like, it's like, America is like playground rules. You make yourself comfortable. It's not my job to make you comfortable. If you're uncomfortable with Muslims being here, that's, as we would say back home, that's your problem. And I think having that kind of more balanced, slightly more muscular approach, I personally think is a much better way to deal with the situation. Not being like braggadocious or going, to extremes, but I feel like you should deal with these people from a position of power, not of your own power, but like, look, we're talking about the deen of Allah. This is what God wants me to do. This is what I believe how God wants me to live. If you are uncomfortable with it, that is your problem. And I have, and now to invoke the great mythos of Americana, like I have no obligation to you as one American to another to make you comfortable in this shared space that we have. So get over yourself. That would personally, like that's how I would approach it. And so anybody who is doing anything else, I think is doing those people a disservice. I think they're doing the Muslims a disservice. I think they are, as Allah had to tell Bani Israel, wa iyaya farhabun, la takhshawhum fakhshawni. Do not fear them, fear me. This is like real Quran. I mean, everybody likes to talk about the Quran. The Muslims like to talk about the Quran, but when it comes time to actually take those, broad strokes and then, make something out of it, everybody just suddenly locks up. They freeze up. Like, no, like you have to not be overly concerned with these people. Now, I'm not saying no concern whatsoever. Like, sure. But at the same time, Muslims in America have one of the best track records of any group of people that have ever come to this country. Like, number one, no human being is flawless. So have there been Muslims that have committed crimes? Sure. No human being is beyond the pale of human frailties. But I would say that Muslims have a pretty damn good track record in terms of whatever metric you want to look at. Crimes committed, education levels, value that they bring to community, right? I mean, by and large, and this would probably be a big difference between us and so-called converts, but the broader Muslim population in America are predominantly entrepreneurial. So they absolutely contribute to the betterment of their society because they make businesses that make jobs that hire people. And they earn higher, probably, at least the last of the demographics that I checked, they earn higher than average incomes, which means that they are higher taxpayers. So from so many different metrics, Muslims contribute positively, right, to life in America. And this kind of milquetoast, mumble mouth type stuff, I cannot stand it. It's cowardly. You have to stand up to these people. Stand up to them, not like as if not from a position of hatred, but like I'm just not going to be bullied. Now look, we can, there's a friend of mine always quotes this funny movie, and I don't know what the movie's from, but he's like, look, no, we can do this, we can do this like men, or we can get into some gangster. You know what I mean? Like, I would prefer for us to have, a gentlemanly conversation to work out maybe a few creases, in this tapestry. Or we can get into some gangster, but I will not be intimidated. And most important, I will go back to just reemphasizing, it's not my job to make you comfortable in a shared space. Like, get this out of your head that I'm in your land, right? And this is for, again, the vast majority of American Muslims not being green card holders. When I'm talking about, American Muslims that are either born here or are naturalized citizens, like this is your country. And it's time that you get that in your head, because I think even a lot of you don't even fully have it in your head that this is your country. So stop making all of these excessive gestures to make this particular group of people comfortable in a shared space. You know, like if I go over to your house, I'll act like a guest. And if you come over to my house, I expect you to be, you know, a good guest as well. And I will do my best as a host to make you comfortable. But the minute we all go outside and we go to the park, it's playground rules. You make yourself comfortable. You don't own this space. And that's something that Muslims, I think, they need to have some spine and backbone to remind these people, you don't own this country. You know, all of us have a negotiated existence with America. It's called being a citizen, of which that can be revoked, right? This idea that just because you're some white folks or whatever from whatever part, you think like this is your land, like you think you individually, your name is on the title and the deed. You don't own this. And you need to be reminded of that. And I'm here to remind you of it. And maybe that will make us feel uncomfortable. I mean, in many ways, this is not dissimilar to what the Prophet ﷺ and the early Muslims went through in Mecca, right? Obviously, the Prophet ﷺ before being called to being a prophet and a messenger was overall highly respected by his people, and his place in his broader society was not really put into question. But the minute he starts doing something different than what the other people were comfortable with, because a lot of it, in a certain kind of way, the Quraysh were just uncomfortable. Even before, again, the early part of Islam, the Muslims weren't applying Sharī'ah law in the way that the Kafir understands it. What, we're just trying to pray. That's about it. We're just trying to pray. Like, you know, that's about the extent of our Sharī'ah, is that we're just simply trying to pray. And we would like to be able to go to the Kaaba, this shared space. And they're like, no, we're not having this. Like, you need to kowtow to us. And so those first 12, 13 years in Mecca was a lot about slowly the Prophet ﷺ responding to them with greater increased backbone. Right? I mean, I don't want anybody to misunderstand that I'm saying that the Prophet ﷺ didn't have a spine before. But what I'm saying is that Allah Ta'ala increasingly told him to, no, keep preaching to the people. You know, it's going to make them uncomfortable, but that's their problem. And I will deal with them. That's their problem. That's not your problem. But just keep doing that. And so, you know, again, we can sit around and want to celebrate his birthday, sallallahu and read the seerah of him, but like, where is the actual application of any of this? Like, where's the application of, yeah, you know what? This is a very, very similar situation to what the man that I was instructed and tasked to follow and to emulate. So I guess I shouldn't just emulate the length of his beard and the length of his pants, or, you know, whatever those things are, right? Which I'm not saying aren't important, but also let me look at the broad strokes of his life and the scenarios and the conditions that Allah Ta'ala put him in, and how he was instructed and how he reacted to them and his companions, and so on and so on and so on. And so it's not very dissimilar. Like, you're trying to set and establish something that works for you, right? Now, the Amish, they have a Sharī'ah, no doubt. Yeah. Like, no doubt they have a Sharī'ah. They are a religious community. They're doing what they want. Nobody's tripping about the Amish. Like, these people down in Texas ain't tripping about the Amish. So again, like, you are almost like inadvertently universalizing or legitimizing their grievance with you by this self-deprecating, spineless attitude toward them. Like, man, that's your damn problem. You ain't got to live here. You know, we're building our space. We're doing our things. This is a free country, as they say. We're not violating any laws. Get the hell out of my way. You don't want to participate in it? You ain't got to participate in it. But I don't have to restrict my life to doing that which only pleases you, of which if I go down that road, there probably ain't going to be too much, if anything at all, that I could even possibly do as a Muslim, especially a brown Muslim, that will ever please you. So if I go down that route, what kind of life am I going to have? What life will my children have? Growing up always with a sense of, and I see this in young second generation Muslim kids, third generation Muslim kids that come from legacy Muslim backgrounds, Arab, Desi and so on, that grow up and they are simultaneously terrified of Islam and being identified with it. And then they're terrified of this broader culture that they feel like they cannot find their own way into. And so they're trapped in this weird limbo la land. They're like in the barzakh of American, existential existence. And this is no way to live. You got to carve out your own existence. So that way, if I were to talk to the people, that's how I would. Just be like, hey, it ain't none of your damn business. And it ain't my job to make you feel comfortable. Now, I would love to invite you. You want to come over? We'll make a nice sofra. We will get out. We can either do a Texas style, we can do brisket, we can do the old world style, we can do biryani, we can do whatever. Like, we will be more than happy to be gracious hosts to have you come and experience what it is we're about. But if you decide that that's not your cup of tea, then lakum dinukum waliya din. You got your deen, you got your life, I got mine. And it's not my job to make you comfortable with what I'm doing in a shared space. You know what I mean? That's generally how I would approach it. That's probably also why they're not inviting me down there to talk.
Imam Marc hasn't got this.
That's why Imam Marc doesn't really do much. That's why Imam Marc doesn't travel much.